The morning had settled into a strange pause, the kind that flattened sound and made distance feel closer than it was. Grass stood unmoving, pressed down by the weight of heat that had arrived earlier than expected. In the open stretch ahead, a young male lion lay on his side, chest rising unevenly, each breath shallow enough to be missed if someone were not looking for it. His ribs pressed clearly against his coat, the skin drawn tight, the dullness of his mane suggesting weeks without strength rather than a single bad night. Nothing about his posture carried threat. His head rested where it had fallen, jaw slack, tail still. A man moving across the grassland noticed the quiet first. It was not the silence of caution, not the held breath that follows a hunt or the warning tension that keeps distance honest. There were no birds lifting away, no insects lifting into a cloud. The air behaved as though nothing important was happening, and that absence pulled his attention forward before his mind fully understood why. He slowed without meaning to, steps shortening, weight shifting carefully into the ground. At a distance that respected instinct on both sides, he stopped. The lion did not lift his head. An ear twitched once, weakly, then stilled again. The man watched for several long seconds, letting the moment declare itself. This was not an ambush. It was not a trap laid by a body pretending to be empty. It was the shape of an animal that had already spent its last reserves simply staying where it was. The lion's breathing held a faint hitch at the top of each rise, as though the muscles were negotiating whether to continue. Dust clung to the fur along his flank, undisturbed. One foreleg lay folded under him at an awkward angle, pads exposed, claws dulled by use and hunger. When a thin breeze passed through the grass, it lifted nothing from his body. He did not flinch. He did not track movement with his eyes. The man stayed where he was, hands loose at his sides, posture open but still. Experience had taught him that urgency could travel faster than sound. He watched the small signs instead, the slow blink of an eye that did not fully close, the brief tightening along the jaw, the way the lion's sides failed to expand as much as they should. These were not signals meant for communication. They were simply what remained. After a while, the man lowered himself to one knee, careful to keep the motion smooth. The lion's gaze shifted then, barely, pupils dull, focus uncertain. There was no attempt to rise. No warning growl formed in the throat. Only a low, involuntary sound escaped with the next breath, more air than voice. The man spoke once, softly, without stepping closer. "It's okay." The grassland held them both in that fragile balance. Sunlight slid higher, warming the lion's coat without reviving it. Somewhere far off, a line of wildebeest moved as a single dark ripple, their hooves carrying sound away rather than toward this place. The man remained still, waiting as the wind bent the grass around the lion's body and then let it rise again. Time passed in small increments that were measured not by clocks but by changes in light and breath. As the sun climbed, it revealed what distance had softened before. The lion's paw pads were split and dry, edges cracked from long miles over hot ground with too little rest. One hind paw twitched occasionally, not in readiness but in reflex, the movement delayed as if the signal had to travel farther than it should. When he tried to lift his head, the effort stalled halfway, neck trembling before gravity claimed it again. His eyes told the rest of the story. They were sunken deep into their sockets, lids heavy, moisture scarce. Each blink came slowly, deliberately, not in awareness but in fatigue, the kind that narrows the world to whatever exists immediately in front of the face. There was no tracking of the man now, no calculation of distance or risk. The gaze drifted, settling on nothing, then shifting again as if searching for shade that wasn't there. The land offered no response. Heat pressed down evenly, indifferent to struggle or stillness. Wind crossed the grass without pausing, lifting dust from dry patches and laying it back down again. Clouds formed far away and dissolved before they could matter. This was not a place that adjusted itself to weakness. It continued as it always had, with or without the presence of a single animal failing quietly within it. The man understood that movement too could be a kind of force. He stayed where he was, letting the lion dictate the limits of the moment. Intervention carried weight here, and weight applied too soon could fracture what little balance remained. He watched the lion's chest, counting the uneven rises, noticing the shallow pauses that followed each breath. He noted how the ears no longer pivoted toward sound, how flies gathered without being flicked away. When the lion attempted again to lift his head, it was slower this time, the effort drawing a low sound from his throat that faded before it fully formed. His forelegs shifted, muscles responding out of habit rather than strength. The movement ended with his chin resting against the ground, dust clinging to the whiskers. There was no frustration in it, only the quiet end of an attempt. The man lowered himself further, sitting now, careful to keep his outline small. He did not reach for tools or signal for help he had not yet earned the need for. Knowledge came first. He let the lion see him without forcing attention, letting familiarity replace alarm. The lion's eyes closed for a moment, then opened again, slower than before. Another blink followed, then another, each one lingering. "It's okay," the man said, barely louder than the wind through the grass. The sound did not change the lion's posture, but it did not disturb it either. His breathing continued, shallow and uneven, but steady enough to remain. One ear shifted faintly, responding more to vibration than meaning. The body language spoke clearly now, stripped of ambiguity. This was not resistance. It was surrender shaped by exhaustion, by a body that had reached the edge and stopped there. The heat continued to settle, the grass whispering as it leaned and straightened again. Somewhere beyond the rise, the land moved on, unaware, while in the open space between man and lion, patience held, thin and deliberate, waiting for what would come next. Help was called, quietly and without urgency in the voice, as if urgency itself might fracture the thin calm holding the moment together. The message traveled outward across distance and time, moving faster than any body could. The man knew it would not return quickly. In this landscape, arrival was never immediate, and waiting was not an absence of action but its own deliberate choice. While the call moved on without him, he stayed. He shifted his position only once, angling himself so that his body cast a narrow band of shade toward the lion's head. It was not much, just a sliver of relief from the sun that had begun to press harder into the open grassland. He placed a small container of water several feet away, far enough to avoid intrusion, close enough to be discovered if strength allowed. Nothing was pushed closer. Nothing was offered with expectation. The lion did not react at first. His breathing remained shallow, chest rising unevenly, each inhale sounding faintly dry. Heat shimmered above the ground now, blurring the edges of everything beyond a few meters. The lion's tongue briefly touched the edge of his mouth, then retreated, the motion slow and incomplete. Dust clung to the pads of his paws, highlighting the cracks that had deepened as the day wore on. Time stretched in uneven layers. The man watched without filling the space with movement. His role had shifted into something quieter than protection or rescue. He was a witness now, present without claiming the moment. The wind carried scents away before they could linger, leaving the air flat and neutral again. Flies gathered and dispersed, drawn and undeterred, as if testing boundaries that no longer held meaning. After a long while the lion moved. It began as a tightening through the shoulders, subtle enough to be mistaken for another breath. Then one foreleg slid forward, claws scraping faintly against dry earth. The effort pulled the rest of his body after it, not rising but dragging inch by inch, until his chest shifted and his head moved closer to the line of shade. The movement was slow, uneven, costly. It ended with his chin resting again on the ground, neck muscles trembling before settling. There was no urgency in the man's response. He did not step closer. He did not retreat. He simply adjusted his posture to keep the shade where it was, allowing the lion to decide its value. The lion's eyes opened wider for a moment, focusing weakly in the man's direction. Not in challenge. Not in appeal. Just recognition of presence. The water remained untouched. The distance between them held. Another stretch of time passed, marked only by the slow drift of light and the shifting angle of shadows. The lion's breathing changed slightly, becoming marginally deeper, then returning to its shallow rhythm. His tail flicked once, not with irritation but reflex, then lay still again. Muscles along his flank quivered faintly as his body adjusted to the new position. Then the sound came. It was low and brief, drawn out of the chest rather than pushed from the throat. Not a roar, not even close. It carried no warning, no demand. It was something softer, more restrained, vibrating just enough to be felt rather than heard at a distance. The sound rose and fell once, then ended, leaving the air unchanged. The man did not move. He let the sound exist without response, understanding that meaning did not require reply. The lion's mouth closed slowly, jaw setting with effort. His eyes remained open, unfocused but present, blinking once after the sound faded. Whatever had prompted it passed without explanation, leaving behind only the quiet again. The grass leaned and straightened with the wind. Somewhere far off, a bird lifted and settled again. The moment held, fragile and suspended, as the lion rested in the edge of shade, and the man remained where he was, listening to the land continue on around them. The first sign was movement at the far edge of vision, a shape separating itself from the grass where nothing had moved for hours. Then another followed, slower, more deliberate. From a distance they were almost indistinct, their bodies carrying the same muted tones as the land itself. As they drew closer, the outline resolved into a lioness, then a second, their frames lean, their strides measured by caution rather than speed. The realization arrived quietly, without drama. The collapsed male was not an isolated loss drifting toward disappearance. He belonged to something that had not fully let go of him. The land had thinned them, scattered them, pressed them outward in search of food and water, but it had not broken the bond entirely. Hunger had stretched the pride into fragments, but not erased it. The man noticed the shift immediately, not in the lions but in the air between them. He stood slowly, backing away without turning, increasing the space he already respected. This was no longer a moment meant for his presence. The lioness closest to the male lowered her head as she approached, ears angled forward, eyes fixed not on the man but on the body lying ahead. Her steps were careful, each one placed with intention, her shoulders rolling with restrained energy. She reached the fallen male and stopped, positioning herself between him and the open space the man now vacated. There was no sound from her at first. She did not bare her teeth or stiffen her tail. Instead, she leaned down, pressing her muzzle gently along the side of his neck, inhaling deeply. Her flank brushed his shoulder, a contact firm enough to register, soft enough not to startle. The second lioness arrived moments later, circling slightly, her attention divided between the horizon and the male on the ground. She paused, then stepped closer, her nose touching his cheek, her breath stirring the dust near his whiskers. A low sound passed between them, brief and restrained, answered by a faint shift of the male's head. It was not strength returning, only acknowledgement. The man continued to retreat until distance softened his outline again. He stopped only when the pride no longer registered his presence. The lionesses did not pursue him. Their focus had narrowed inward, closing around their own. More movement followed. Another shape approached from the left, then another from farther back, each lion drawn in by the same quiet urgency. They did not rush. They did not scatter. They came as if pulled by a thread they all felt but did not question. The circle around the fallen male thickened, bodies forming a loose boundary against the open grass. One lion nudged the male's flank with the side of his head, not sharply but insistently. Another brushed past his hind legs, tail flicking lightly against his paws. A lioness lowered herself beside him, her body aligned with his, breathing close enough to be felt. Soft calls passed between them, low and brief, sounds meant to carry only within the circle. "Easy," the man said once from far back, more to the moment than to the animals themselves. The pride did not react to the sound. Their attention stayed fixed. The male's chest rose a little more fully now, his breathing still labored but steadier. His eyes opened wider, catching the shapes around him. One lioness pressed her forehead briefly against his shoulder, then lifted it again, watching for response. They did not leave him space to disappear. Every movement they made worked against the stillness that had claimed him earlier. They shifted, touched, called softly, refusing absence. The land remained indifferent, the heat unrelenting, the wind unchanged. But within the loose circle of bodies, something held. The grass bent around them, and when it rose again, the pride was still there, gathered tightly around the one who had almost slipped away. With the others close now, the air around the fallen lion changed. Not in temperature or sound, but in density, as if presence itself carried weight. The lioness pressed more firmly along his side, her body a steady line of warmth against his ribs. Another stood facing him, head low, breathing slow, her scent filling the narrow space between them. The male's chest rose again, deeper this time, the breath uneven but fuller than before. He shifted one foreleg beneath himself, claws scraping softly as they searched for purchase. The movement was hesitant, incomplete, and for a moment it seemed it would end there. The lioness beside him adjusted instantly, leaning her shoulder into his, offering balance without force. The male's muscles trembled visibly as he gathered what remained, his head lifting, neck straining, eyes narrowing with the effort of staying upright against gravity that had felt heavier all day. The rise was not sudden. It unfolded in stages, pauses stitched between movements. His hindquarters followed last, lifting slowly, then wavering before settling into a shaky stand. For a breathless moment, he swayed, weight shifting unevenly, his body searching for alignment it no longer remembered easily. The lioness remained pressed against him, steady and unyielding, absorbing the imbalance. Another stepped closer, flank brushing his shoulder, reinforcing the fragile structure they had formed together. The male stood fully then, head low, spine curved, legs locked more by will than strength. His breathing came in short bursts, sides pulling inward sharply before releasing. One paw lifted and set down again as he tested the ground, adjusting to the unfamiliar sensation of being upright after so long collapsed. A low sound escaped his chest, brief and restrained, answered immediately by a soft call from one of the lionesses. At a distance, the man watched without moving. He did not raise his hands or step forward. The moment no longer belonged to him. He understood that his presence, once neutral, now carried the weight of interruption. He stayed still, allowing the space between them to widen naturally, letting the pride reclaim the shape of their own movement. The lionesses began to guide the male forward, not pushing, not pulling, but moving just ahead of him, setting a pace he could follow. He took a step, then another, each one careful, measured, supported by bodies close on either side. The group shifted slowly, forming a loose line that angled toward the lowering sun. Dust rose faintly beneath their paws, hanging briefly in the air before settling again. Dusk softened the land, draining harshness from the light and replacing it with gold. The lions' shapes stretched and thinned, their outlines blending with the grass as they moved. The male leaned heavily into the lioness beside him, her stride adjusting to match his uneven rhythm. Together they continued, not fast, not far, but forward. The man stepped back once more, then turned away, his departure quiet and unmarked. The land absorbed his footsteps without trace. Behind him, the lions moved on, silhouettes merging with the horizon, their forms slowly dissolving into the warm haze of evening. As the sun slipped lower, sound thinned again. Wind moved through the grass, lifting it gently before letting it fall. Somewhere beyond sight, the pride continued together, no longer still, no longer alone. And in the open grassland left behind, silence returned, not empty but settled, carrying the quiet knowledge of having witnessed survival choose, once more to continue.